All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force fourth virtual summit series um, for an environmentally just regenerative future. Today's topic is sustainable production, consumption of resources, and sequestration. I would like to introduce and welcome Karina Gould for the land acknowledgement. Karina is the leader of she's a spokeswoman for the Lejeune Ohlone peoples, and she's going to do a land acknowledgement. And so, Karina, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilmember Davila, for inviting me again to be a part of this wonderful gathering. Karina. Good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you. I know that we are meeting virtually. Today, I am in my home territory of Huichin. Huichin actually encompasses Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, and Piedmont. And so from our ancestors to yours, we want to bring people in so that we could all be of one mind today as we go through and try to create a better world and future for the next 7 generations. So I'd like to offer just a few words and then ask us to take a deep breath and come into space together. So today I'm happy to look out my window and to see a blue sky. And I believe the last time we gathered together, we were just getting over a lot of the smoke and was happy to breathe good air. So I actually just want us to take in a deep breath together and let it go. And let's be thankful that we can breathe fresh air today. I want to ask us to take in a deep breath again. And as we let it go, I want us to remember to let go of anything outside of this meeting that we don't need right now. I want us to take a deep breath in. And as we let it go, ask all of our ancestors from the 4 directions to be with us, to open our minds and our ears and our hearts to what people have to say and to offer as we try to create a new pathway for the world in the future. Thank you so much, Council Member Davila, for inviting me this morning. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Karina. It's such a wonderful day when you started out for us. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to say that thank you to everyone who's helped with getting this together. This is our 4th series. I want to thank you, all the volunteers, Ruth, Abby, Jack, Steve, and everyone, because it takes a village to raise a child, and it really takes a village to gather everyone together and to create this series. And it's been wonderful so far. We've had, I think, over close to, I think, 1,000 people that have gathered for these events or registered anyway. And we've made a little bit of money, and it's been, we've gained a lot of knowledge for sure. And it's just been really great. And I just want to, I'm so grateful that today, we are having a little bit better air because the last time it was pretty dismal. And we have a lot to be concerned about in these days with the climate, the election, all these things. So remember to love yourself, forgive yourself, breathe, stay calm, and enjoy today because it's going to be amazing. And I'm going to hand it off to Amos, who's our Vice Chair of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. I'm the chair and the founder. And I also just want to thank my son Armando, who got this whole ball rolling, and all of you for being here, because without you, we wouldn't have a series. So thank you so much. Go for it, Amos. You have
Thank you.
103 participants right now.
There we go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Karina, for that welcome as well. My name is Amos White. I'm Vice Chair of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. I have the honor of hosting our plenary session here today, and in guiding you through the steps of where we've been as a climate emergency task force. We, as the council member has said, have been on a journey for more than 2 years now to really bring together a coalition here in the Bay Area of task or of nonprofit organizations, elected officials, municipal staffers, as well as agencies across the area to actually have a substantive conversation to center our frontline communities and organizations in their climate action plans, to redirect funding to those impacted communities. And I'm really proud and honored to participate in such a group. We started to pull people together last year in 2 summits that we held. One first in July of last year for specifically elected officials and municipal staffers. That was a very good and engaging summit. It, for the first time, brought people together here in the Bay Area to intentionally discuss the climate emergency or mobilizing within a climate emergency and passing climate emergency declarations. And in trying to look at what policy areas cities could begin to start conversations on collaboration with their own climate action plans. And from that, we held 2 months later, from that July and September, we held a second summit for nonprofit organizations with the same design and the same intent. And out of that came, again, very fruitful outputs, which we have brought forward into this year's virtual summit series. It began this year. The series began in July, where our summit series was for a regenerative, for a just and regenerative future. It was a very strong or a big turnout, I would say, at our very first meeting. And our topic areas covered areas of city and regional planning and housing, ecological protection that we did have, Green New Deal, just recovery, social justice, as well as resiliency. The last 2 areas we covered were funding and public finance within that, and defund the police in terms of its, not just as a slogan, but as an area of looking at an area of potential funding for redirecting funding to communities and community programs. We carried that forward into an August virtual summit, which was focused on fossil fuel-free Bay Area. Another strong lineup and turnout, if you will, of topics that we had. One on decommissioning California refineries and beyond. We had a I Can't Breathe, Bay Area quality and environmental justice. One on how to defund the fossil fuel industry, and also a power mapping the air district that we had. And from there, again, we had outputs. And also with all of these, we have recorded each one of these so that you could go back and visit these, or if you will, drop into the plenaries and into each work group session so that you could virtually participate or see the discussion of what followed and what ensued, and what outputs or what outputs that each of these groups did have when that they reported out to us. In September, just last month, we focused on green infrastructure and all electric buildings, transportation, and 100% renewable energy. Green infrastructure really helped us focus on the areas of 100% clean energy, building decarbonization as a breakout, electric vehicle roadmaps, Our fourth and last was clean trucks and buses that we took on in terms of transportation modalities. And again, another robust summit. But today we present our sustainable production and consumption of resources summit. Particularly excited for several of these plenaries, but I won't be able to visit all of them. And you will find links, as the chairwoman said, in the chat that will be put down below after our plenary. Today, we're going to hear, or you will have an opportunity to participate in one of 5 different workshops. Those will be in consumption-based GHG accounting, presented by Chris Jones and the Cool Climate Network, and Brian Reyes of the City and County of San Francisco. Our second workshop will be Zero Waste, Plastic Pollution and Wasted Food Reduction. That'll have 4 presenters for you: Sarah Weber of Berkeley Food Network, Yuka Nakashima of Food Shift, Jackie Nunez of Plastic Pollution Coalition, and Lindsay Hoyle of Dispatch Foods. Our next one will be a carbon sequestration, carbon farming workshop. There we'll have Ben Weiss of Contra Costa Resource Conservation District, Trevor Probert of Stop Waste, myself, Amos White of 100,000 Trees for Humanity, Anthony Mint, I believe I pronounced that correctly, Anthony Mint of Zero Footprint, and of the Carbon Sequestration Group. The last two workshops are on watershed wetlands restoration. That'll present, our 4 presenters there will be Kevin Conger of CMG Landscape Architects, Linda Hunter of Wild Oyster Project, Caitlin Sweeney of San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and Liz Taylor of Dura Marine. Our 5th workshop, if you choose to participate in, out of the 5, is on climate literacy in schools. And Sarah Rainey, a group of folks from Sierra Club of Sarah Rainey, Helen Fitzmaurice, Deirdre Snyder, and Scott Duyan will be presenting in an informative session as well. So that's been our journey and where we are in terms of where we've been and how we got here. We're really excited to have all of you participating fully, if you will, in the workshops, asking questions, engaging. It'll be an opportunity actually to develop, if you will, not necessarily solutions, but further questions to help you where you are with your work, and also to inform your group and guide them as we continue to hold this conversation on climate emergency mobilization here in the Bay Area. With that, I would like to say I now have the pleasure of introducing Director Debbie Rafael. Debbie is the director of San Francisco Department of the Environment. She leads and implements the city's bold climate action initiatives there. A scientist by training, Debbie has spent most of her career as a public servant working to ensure a safe, healthy, and livable environment for all. In partnership with the mayor and board of supervisors, Debbie has helped steer a multi-agency effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions citywide there in San Francisco, including setting a new bold goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Debbie will share the city's framework now and call to action in its 0-80-100 Roots plan. With that, Debbie Rafael, Director of City and County of San Francisco Department of Environment. Debbie?
Thank you, Amos. What a great introduction and what a great context setting for all of us as we embark on this 4th summit. I'm so honored to be asked to kick us off along with Council Member Davalos and you, Amos. This is a phenomenal group you have brought together. So what I am going to do, and this is not my biggest strength, but I'm going to share my screen and you will let me know if you can see it yet. There we go. Now I'm going to hit from the beginning and give it a second to get there because I'm learning. It takes a little while on Zoom. There we go. All right. Wonderful. All set. So when I thought about how I would kick us off today with such an amazing set of talks that you're going to be hearing, I saw something that spurred me gave me the theme for my talk. So my talk is about from anxiety to action. And this is something the council member referred to in her opening remarks, that we need to find hope in a time of crisis. So this, somebody texted me this, and I thought, oh my God, how perfect. So we're all sort of overwhelmed by the collective anxieties, election anxiety, COVID anxiety, regular old anxiety, global warming anxiety. And when we are feeling this incredible weight of anxiety, it's easy to feel frozen by it. And in fact, that's very dangerous because one of the outputs of anxiety can actually be apathy, cynicism, hopelessness. And that's the challenge for us, is how we're going to break out of these multiple anxieties that are hitting us right now. And I think the first thing to understand is that the antidote for anxiety is action, and that we are truly all in this together. This was taken at the Paris Climate Summit in 2015. I was there with probably many of you on this call. It was an amazing moment when the world came together and we knew we were all in it together. And I think in this moment of pandemic, this moment of tremendous anxiety, it's important to ground ourselves in that memory and in that faith that when we are all in it together, we can move the planet, we can heal the planet, we can make change. But the problem, the task ahead of us is truly existential and truly large. And so if we are going to tackle this challenge, we're going to need to engage everyone, not just the converted, not just the usual suspects. And so we're going to need a way to talk about climate change in a way that inspires action, doesn't induce anxiety. And one of your sessions today is on how we educate at schools, because that's a way of starting that idea of inspiring action. So in San Francisco, when we thought about how are we going to inspire and be concrete, we came up with this. This is San Francisco's climate action strategy in a nutshell. And I love how Amos said to me that to him, this is poetry, which I so agree, that this kind of succinct thinking and visual images can be a way for all of us to grasp what is within our personal power to do and the entirety of what we must do to protect the planet. 0, 80, 100 roots. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes explaining what that is, because today is really about 0 and roots. That's where we're focusing on. But this whole summit series has very much been about all of these within the context of social justice, within the context of equity, which overlays everything that we do. So let's dive in. 0. 0 is zero waste to landfill and incineration. So of course, that starts with putting things in the right place, separating your discards into the blue bin, the green bin, and hopefully not much left in the black bin. And of course, it's not just giving people the 3 bins, it's also all the programs and policies that we put together in places like San Francisco and the Bay Area to make sure it's easy to do that and that people are held accountable to get it right. And I don't have time today to go into all of those programs and policies, but they frame the entirety of our aspect of driving towards 0 waste, driving towards minimizing what goes into that black bin, into our landfills. And of course, as Amos mentioned, and as another session on food waste prevention and plastic pollution is going to talk about, is it's not just that end of life management, it's looking upstream. How are we going to prevent this pollution to begin with? Because as some of you know, every pound of trash or every pound of product even results in 70 pounds more of waste upstream in the production of that. And therefore we have to make sure that when we are looking at our responsibility on the climate front, we're not just looking at avoiding landfills, we're looking at minimizing consumption. And that's another session today on consumption-based inventories, where you can learn about how cities are actually parsing that out. What makes the most impact if we want to look at consumption from a climate impact? So so part of zero is not only putting things in the right place, but it's preventing waste to begin with. All right, 80. 80 is 80% of trips in sustainable modes. That means getting out of your car. That means getting on transit, getting on a bicycle, doing a car share if you must drive. Walking is always wonderful, renting a scooter. There are so many ways for us in the Bay Area to get out of our cars. And what's wonderful about this goal and the zero goal is that as individuals, we can measure our progress. Are 80% of our trips out of cars? Let's start with us as individuals and then work out from there. And of course, 100% renewable energy. This isn't just 100% renewable electricity, which of course, that's part of this. We need to make sure that all of our electricity comes from renewable sources. The heart of this and the really difficult and challenging part right now is getting off of fossil fuels. So 100% renewable energy means we get off of diesel and gasoline and we get off of natural gas. And I'm super proud of the work that was started in the city of Berkeley that has been picked up in 30 other cities to ban natural gas in new construction. There's a lot of excitement around this, a lot of momentum, not only in these cities, but with Governor Newsom as well. So this 100 goal is something within our reach, and there's a lot of work to be done. So 0, 80, 100. I like to say that's how we do less bad in the world. But roots is how we heal the planet. Because even if we succeed today on 0, 80, 100, which is pretty tough, but even if we did, we would have too much carbon in the atmosphere right now. We would still have climate change and still have global warming and all the impacts thereof. So we have to not just stop putting carbon into the atmosphere. We have to pull it out. We have to get back to pre-industrial levels of carbon in the atmosphere. And we need to put that carbon, which is not our enemy, we need to put that carbon to good use. And Roots is all about restoring balance. It's about pulling carbon where it's not useful in the atmosphere and putting it where it is useful, into the bodies of plants, into the health of ecosystems that include the animals and the humans that live there. So how do we in the Bay Area tackle Roots? Well, the first thing we do is focus on supporting the natural ecosystems, supporting biodiversity, because that is where carbon is getting sequestered through nature's design. And in fact, you have two opportunities to learn about this today. There's a session on carbon sequestration and carbon farming, and another session on wetlands ecosystems. Both of those are getting at this idea of pulling carbon out of the air by restoring ecosystems. Another way that cities are working on this is by connecting the urban with the rural. We do that when we rip up concrete and put in community gardens. We also do this when we restore our natural areas, when we plant trees. There are lots of ways that cities can connect urban to rural, can remind us of our connectivity to the land, and can to pull carbon out of the air. And for me, the thing that brings me incredible hope and gets me completely away from my anxiety is when I reflect on the power of the green bin, because the green bin turns out to be the secret weapon to heal the planet. Because every time we put a banana peel in the green bin and not in the black bin, we are avoiding methane emissions from landfills resulting from that banana peel. And as people know, methane is 86 times more potent at capturing heat than carbon dioxide is. And not only are we doing less bad, but we're using that compost to heal the planet, because the compost that comes out of our green bin goes onto rangeland, goes onto agricultural land. And as the work of UC Berkeley has shown and other scientists throughout the world now, when we restore the soil's health, we have a phenomenal impact on the carbon sequestration capacity of that soil. So 0, 80, 100 roots, that is the way we in San Francisco talk about turning anxiety into action. And it's something that can be thought of from the individual level, to the institutional level, to the city level, to the country level. We can ask ourselves, how are we doing on 0, 80, 100 roots as a way to not only stop the bad, but heal the planet? I truly believe that the world is run and is changed by those who show up. And each of you made a decision this morning when you could have been doing something else to be here together. And it's the power of showing up that gets us out of anxiety and makes us believe that we can do this together, and helps us become more effective because we are not alone. We are doing this together. And I do believe that change starts with us. And I do believe that action is the antidote to anxiety. And today, these summits are bringing together elected officials, city staff like me, researchers like from the UC Berkeley, bringing together community organizations, bringing together environmental groups, and bringing together individuals who are simply motivated to do what is in their individual power. So that's a big us. That's a big us. And I'm excited to see what I can learn today, and I'm excited for all of us, and I'm hopeful, and I am inspired by all of you. So thank you for letting me help you kick this off, and I can't wait to see what is next. So I will stop sharing my screen right now. Somehow. There we go. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie Raphael, Director of Department for the Environment and City and County of San Francisco. At this time, I guess we'll open up for Q&A. If we have some questions, please raise your hand in the chat. Or not in the chat, excuse me. Please raise your hand where you click on participants, and you'll see an icon at your bottom left. It says more. Click on that, and there's a hand raise that you can raise if you have a question of Debbie and her presentation.
So
I'm going
Amos,
to open up. Well, go ahead, Debbie.
I see a question in the chat about, there's wonderful things in the chat, and I would encourage everyone to look at the chat, because the chat is actually not only questions for me, but they are resources and links to videos. So things that came up for people when they heard my talk. The one question to me that I see is about using the language of the Green New Deal. And, you know, do we talk about that in San Francisco? And it's very interesting. We don't. And it's not because nobody likes it or doesn't agree with the, you know, and the Green New Deal, that is a very general statement about all the elements that need to be put in place together. And so our focus in San Francisco, and maybe this is because we're the bubble inside the bubble, what I would call, you know, the bubble is the state of California and the Bay Area is the bubble inside the bubble. So we're not really worried about people understanding the breadth. It's very much about what do we need to do? Let's get our act together and start doing. And so the challenge, so the Green New Deal as a metaphor, as an organizing principle, hasn't really been utilized. It's not that it couldn't be or shouldn't be. It's just more right. What we're doing now is we're using our climate action plan. We're using 0, 80, 100 roots as a way to focus. And I'm using that because it's very helpful. And I'll just put this, the Department of the Environment, while it's wonderful that we have it, it's phenomenal we have it, we have very little authority over other city agencies. So my job as the director is to poke, prod, and as well as complement and champion other city agencies who have a lot more authority. And the Green New Deal is quite broad. So what I like to do when I'm working with the head of transportation or public works or the Public Utilities Commission is to focus on their goal in that climate action plan and get really specific. If I'm missing something and somebody can help me see how the Green New Deal could help me articulate something, I would love to hear about it. That would be really wonderful. All right.
Good. Thank you. Let's take the next question. I know Steve Bloom had his hand up there. Steve?
Let's see. So I had so Debbie, one of the things that really concerns me about this stuff is, I mean, nobody likes to talk about the bad outcome in climate. Okay. On the other hand, that can be kind of motivating. And you talked about not wanting to have anxiety, and I agree that taking action is a great way to deal with anxiety. But there is that big question lurking there, and it's not just and so it has a very specific meaning though, which is the specific thing I wanted to ask you about. And then we were all really thrilled to see this initial talk maybe 4 or 5 years ago of these goals for 2050, and it's become increasingly apparent that that's not fast enough. I think all the recent science points to that. And so my question is, are we anxious enough, not just in terms of the not just in terms of the goals we set, but just in terms of our sense of urgency, and how does that relate back to those goals? So hope that was clear.
I mean, Steve, and that your question would have been absolutely the right question even 9 months ago. It is now such an even more important question because of the pandemic. And when I find that the level of anxiety is overwhelming people, and so that sense of urgency that I feel in my bones that wakes me up at night, that keeps me moving, it's such an interesting, and to me, so there's dilemmas and there's problems. So problems can be solved by just a fix, like a technology, and there are dilemmas which are more nuanced and challenging to figure out the path forward. And I think what you're bringing up is, how do we instill that sense of urgency without making people just say, screw it, it's too big, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm just going to crawl in a hole, is a dilemma. It's a real dilemma, and it's a back and forth. And I don't know that there is a right place to hit that line. I don't think that in San Francisco we're ignoring the urgency. In fact, it's part of what we say when we get a letter from an unnamed chamber of commerce in our city saying we don't want to go all electric because natural gas isn't so bad after all. We answer that with our sense of urgency. We answer that with saying, we don't have time for treating natural gas as a clean alternative. We have to figure out how to do some leapfrogging. So I think you bring up a really juicy point that I would love, that needs that constant questioning. We can't ignore the gloom. I mean, that's why it was called the Climate Reality Project, because the reality is very, very horrendous. And in San Francisco, I have to tell you, I was kind of relieved. I mean, it was helpful to me when there were wildfires and it was orange in San Francisco, because that gave us the way to say, it's not just a pandemic we're worried about, it's this much larger existential threat that the pandemic is a part of. So I definitely hear you. And in terms of, are we fast enough, or even are we getting to our goals? San Francisco is ahead of schedule, but our next chunk, our next 30% is going to be really hard, and it's going to it cannot be achieved without some real transformational change and big decisions. And our elected leaders are going to need to have the political backing of all of us so that they can respond. Because you're right, we're running out of time.
Thank you, Debbie Rafael. We've run a little bit short here on time, but I do appreciate you being available and accessible to answer folks' questions. Folks, if you have any further questions, please drop them in chat as we can, or if we can, we'll see if Debbie can answer a few of yours in chat, or she could answer them at her leisure and we could add them back into our chat later on. But Debbie, thank you again for, again, such inspiring presentation, and we wish you well. Moving along to our next speaker, I have the honor and pleasure of introducing colleague here on our task force, Armando Davila-Kirkwood. Armando is an artist, organizer and educator, facilitator, and thought leader. He's worked throughout the progressive sector in a variety of roles, from solar installer to a teaching artist to a conference organizer, campaign manager, and more, as well as a mindfulness instructor. He currently sits on the steering committee of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force here, and he's also busy now developing his project One World One. It's the idea that humanity's best survival strategy is a unified one. And Armando will now present to us on the Just Transition Resolution as recently proposed for the city of Berkeley. And with that, if we can get that resolution, a link to that resolution in chat, you all can look at that as well. With such, I introduce to you Armando. Armando?
Hey, yeah, I'll drop that resolution link at the end unless someone else can fish it out. But hi, everyone. My name is Armando Davila-Kirkwood. I'm son of Councilmember Davila and helped kind of push her into this whole regional campaign with the support of the Climate Mobilization in 350 Bay Area. And so to the point of Steve, or Steven, I forgot which one, the whole idea of the Regional Climate Emergency Declaration Campaign is the idea that the Bay Area does a climate mobilization. I'm personally kind of concerned around strictly focusing on the climate and want to make sure that environmental justice needs are centered. And so I've been trying to shift that focus into this just transition framework to a regenerative economy. And so this resolution kind of has that in the heart of it. So in my analysis, a deep emissions descent scenario is unavoidable to preserve life. And I'm kind of on that view that we do need to accelerate these timelines for transition and do this mobilization dimension of it, because that has yet to happen. And it is also my analysis that we cannot solve any of these problems within the current extractive growth dependent economy. So we have to ditch this economy in order to get what we need to get to like a safe zone. So let me figure out how to do this slide. So the Just Transition Resolution put forth by Councilmember Davila, which I and 20 others all worked on together, including some members of the task force. It has 12 recommendations. It's in a first draft and may go through further revisions. So the first one is invest in a regenerative whole city infrastructure, policy, development, and design process. So that's looking at the city as a whole and placing regenerative goals as the forefront instead of sustainability goals. The second one is embrace donut economics, meeting social needs within planetary boundaries. That's an effort that's been popping off in Europe and the United States. This woman, Kate Rayworth, proposed a 21st century economic system that is growth agnostic and honors the hard limits of our planet. Draft a set of ordinances ensuring only earth-friendly, non-essential products are sold within the city limits by 2025. That goal can change, but the core idea is that we should stop allowing the sale of things we can't functionally recycle. So kind of tackling the supply and demand side of zero waste. Focus the commissions on a just transition. So a just transition framework was put forth by Movement Generation and Grassroots Global Justice, and is really the forefront of environmental justice leaders thinking on how to ensure there's no environmental racism, classism in our transition scenarios. Creating a just transition commission is, got a little bit of pushback from the people at the city of Berkeley. They've been kind of shifting how the power of their commissions. So fund, form, and hold a regional and state collaborative through 2050 to plan a just transition to a regenerative economy here in the Bay Area. So you may or may not know, Berkeley was the first climate emergency declaration, which endorsed a regional climate mobilization through a just transition lens. And since then, 25 cities with 25 different community-driven efforts and 25 different elected officials or consortium of them came together to pass a climate emergency declaration calling for a regional climate mobilization. So the Bay Area has, after 2 years, positioned itself saying, yes, we formally want a regional climate effort. So I heard recently that Napa proposed a joint powers authority, just within their own, Napa County within their own discourse of how we could bring all these different governmental agencies together to enforce this framework, to respond within the framework that this is already an existential threat and shouldn't be put off any further. Form a transnational task force to be sustained until 2050 to co-execute a shared transitional peace effort in moving their immediate societies and economies towards an ethical and regenerative trajectories. So the cool thing about the climate emergency movement as a subsection of the larger climate movement, which really focuses on it's already an emergency, is that there are 1,790 governments worldwide who have declared a climate emergency. So, you know, in my kind of less bureaucratically concerned and more kind of visionary, tactically concerned mind, that is a coalition of a significant majority of the world who is theoretically down to mobilize their economies, mobilize their cities, mobilize their governments, and organizing those governments who are willing to go in that very narrow function of mobilizing. You know, there's a lot of possibility there. Define the hard bioregional boundaries by which Berkeley and the Bay Area governments will attempt to govern safely within, and endow our regional natural landscapes and like the Bay, for example, with rights. So legalizing the rights of nature, putting nature within the framework of the law. I would be super stoked if our Bay and our forests and our wetlands had rights. Suspend any and all projects that are incompatible with this trajectory, center Indigenous leadership throughout the entire process. I should have put fund participation. Call for, and then number 11, call for a new economic system, which in its design meets human needs within planetary boundaries. So right now that is donut economics in my mind. And then 12, the Sanders Institute and Progressive International put forth the Global Green New Deal as a way to kind of bypass the difficulty if the United States mobilizes, or the global north mobilizes their economy without the rest of the world kind of negotiating how we're going to share resources and, you know, who's going to be able to be carbon neutral at what cost to who else. So, and doing that simultaneously as a world. So, and the vision is that the Bay Area enacts a safe and just transition to a one planet compatible bioregional global economy that equitably and renewably distributes abundance. So that's the vision, and that's our working vision for what comes forth from this regional climate emergency campaign. And that is what the resolution is proposing through all those specific recommendations. So there's a lot of big ideas. So one big idea is to fund these intergovernmental transdisciplinary teams through 2050, even though I think we need to bust this out way before then. 2050 is the agreed upon date, to just keep the collaborative going. And the idea is that, you know, governments could pool resources, they could simultaneously implement policies, they could sic their lawyers on tackling some of the legal issues together collectively. It's collective power is the core idea here. And, you know, that's a complex thing to navigate, but we need to planetize our governance. So this is a nimble network that could be formed. The other one is to initiate a full-scale societal mobilization. You know, and what I'm thinking about, like the 80% transit by people spending, the 80% transit goal in San Francisco. If people knew every year that they were moving towards a zero emissions trajectory with, you know, working knowledge of the latest science, their will to go along with these transformations would be much higher. So how we signal our society to that we're mobilizing now, we're energizing, we're doing this transition in its final form is going to be really important. So the communications and how we notify the public. Committing to a just transition ethos and framework developed by frontline environmental justice organizations. And ideally, this wasn't in the resolution, it's earlier draft, but create an oversight board with enforcement. So as we know, a transition is inevitable, we hope, but justice is not. So grassroots global justice and movement generation have come together to develop these frameworks. And now there is a meta framework that is in a document, a pathway to a regenerative economy, or a people's pathway to a regenerative economy, which I'll drop in the chat later, that has 12 planks that talks about how they want to see this happen. Feminist economics, just recovery, just transition for workers and communities. It's a meta framework of environmental justice leaders. So we should commit to that as a guiding ethos and have oversight. The other big idea in the resolution is to shift to bioregional governance as part of an overall strategy to becoming a one planet compatible bioregion. So that idea of one planet compatible, again, is that our economy requires multiple Earths to sustain itself. The Global Footprint Project here in Oakland tracks Overshoot Day, the day when we've consumed more resources than our Earth can handle. And they're trying to move that date back to December 31st. But ultimately, we need to be regenerative. So, we should be, at the end of this, accruing a surplus of social and environmental capacities at the end of a year. So the Bay Area is a bioregion. And that means, there's so much water, land, forest, intellectual capital that we are surviving on. But because we have an international economy, we can, overconsume in one area and get resources from another. And because we live in the United States and we have the military power, we have the power to overconsume and enforce our access to resources through the military. So this idea is that we want to bring our economy here in the Bay Area as close to our bioregional capacity as possible and well within a one planet range of consumption and impact, and equitably and ethically compensate for our inability to sustain ourselves with other bioregions that are also, as sustainable as possible, and to move into that trajectory. The other idea is to just, phase out all non-essential, non-recyclable products, phase out one design paradigm, one manufacturing paradigm, and phase in another, and, create those market mechanisms for which, we're producing less trash. So, we phase out single-use plastic in a lot of areas, but there's a whole other host of plastic bags, I should say, in grocery stores. And, we need to really tactically phase out one paradigm of products. The other idea is that sustainability is not enough. We need to be regenerative. So if we reach sustainability within our current, planetary situation, although no one talks about leaving all the plastic in the ocean, it's a given that we should clean up the plastic in the ocean. To clean up the plastic in the ocean is a regenerative move. And so as we know, we have Project Drawdown here in the Bay Area. They talk about reversing global warming. So that's reversing the negative impact on the climate system as one planetary boundary. But I say we need to be comprehensively regenerative. And so the calls for justice are about restoring wounded people, oppressed people, centuries of violence and genocidal behaviors. So, being holistically regenerative as a region is the vision here. Also articulated by many other people. And then I'm running a little bit over time, so I'll finish up soon. But donut economics. So the donut is this idea that there are planetary boundaries and there are social needs. And we want to stay within the ecological ceiling of the 9 planetary boundaries while meeting the 12 dimensions of the social foundation if we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that we need to stay in the ecologically safe and socially just space. And we're deeply out of balance with that. There are multiple planetary boundaries that are being crossed and a ton of social needs here in the Bay Area that we can see visibly with the homelessness crisis and globally, which we hear about on the news on a regular basis, where we're deeply out of balance. So there are 4 questions, and the donut economics team has a methodology they use for internationally assessing a city by producing city portraits, and they have like a social process that residents can participate in to answer these questions. So those are the big ideas in the Just Transition Resolution. It's the vision of the task force, the vision of Councilmember Davila and her ragtag team of visionary activists. And so thank you for letting me present, and yeah, excited about all of our work together.
Good. Thank you, Armando. With that, and looking at the time, we're going to move on as we're going to head shortly here into our workshops. After your workshop, we ask everyone to return back here when the workshops close. Return back to the plenary. We will have report outs from each one of the workshops as they report out what key findings or questions that they had in their workshops there. This is our closing plenary session. We had an opening plenary session, and all of this has been recorded for you. So you could, at some point in the future, once we get this up, go back and visit that and really listen to the conversation that we're having here regionally, and some folks, I guess, perhaps even coming in globally for this summit series on how to begin a climate emergency mobilization where you are with your key stakeholders, from individuals in your communities and frontline communities to the nonprofits and NGOs serving them, your city, municipal, and governmental staff and elected officials, and or your regional, if you will, agencies as well, in realigning climate action plans and funding by centering, if you will, impacted individuals and communities in their decision-making processes and in their funding priorities as well. At today's summit, we have just finished our workshops, and we're going to have a brief report out from each one of the workshops that we did have. Just to recap, we had 5 workshops today, one on consumption-based greenhouse gas accounting, a second on zero waste, focusing on plastic pollution and wasted food reduction. Our third workshop was on carbon sequestration and carbon farming. Our fourth was on watershed, with wetlands restoration as a focus. And then our fifth was climate literacy in schools. And I'm going to ask each one, going in reverse order this time, something new and different. We'll start with climate literacy in schools, and ask if you had a person there who could briefly report out maybe some of your findings, or encapsulate, if you will, some of the sentiment that was captured in your workshop. Who would that be, please? Go ahead and unmute yourself from climate literacy in schools.
Yes. Hi, Amos. This is Sarah Rani, and I'll do that wrap up.
Good.
Way to do the reverse order thing. That's a
yeah. So yeah, threw you
keep us on our toes. So I'm representing the climate literacy breakout session, as well as the climate literacy subcommittee of the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. This is a group that was formed in 2016 and has been working since that time to really bring climate change literacy to school districts as well as independent schools. The reason this is important, a couple things. One is a joint NPR-Ipsos poll from the spring of 2019 showed that over 90% of teachers and 80% of parents want climate change taught in schools, but most teachers don't feel like they have the background knowledge nor the tools to teach it effectively, nor do they have the time or resources to learn about it. I think that was true in 2019. Clearly, that's even more true in 2020. We are in a moment, as Debbie said at the beginning, where there is a lot of anxiety and it is compounding. But the idea of bringing teachers, bringing school districts on board to commit to teaching about climate literacy, enabling teachers with, or providing them with the curriculum they need to do that successfully, and bringing communities on board to do that effort, that organizing work together, is one of those ways that we can build a brighter future and do it in a really equitable way. So what our group did, 4 things. We defined what climate literacy means to us and what students should get in school about climate change. We broke into subgroups in our session and talked to people within our communities to take steps towards organizing climate change literacy in our school or district. And we did that by taking some initial steps to really do that organizing work. We shared a bunch of the curricular and organizing resources that we, as the Climate Literacy Committee, have gathered over the years. And I'd love to share that with this whole group, if that would be appropriate. And then we even provided some templates for emailing school district or school board members and candidates, parents and teachers in a community to help get them started with this idea of teaching climate change literacy. So it was a great group, a lot of engagement and a lot of progress, and it was a pleasure to be part of it.
Good. Thank you so very much. Next, we'll hear from watershed and wetlands restoration. If you had a person who was going to report back out, please unmute yourself at this time. And Sarah, again, thank you. You can mute yourself. But watershed, wetlands restoration, who will that be, please?
Hi, my name is Clavian, and I'll be representing the Watershed and Wetlands Workshop. So we had a really interesting discussion. The Bay Area has so many wetlands surrounding the Bay, and it's super important. In fact, the watershed has a lot of benefits, such as filtering water, providing habitats, and just providing a space where people can enjoy and appreciate nature, as well as do a lot of scientific research. So we had a lot of great representatives, including CMG Landscape Architecture, who highlighted their project of the depaved park in Alameda, where the goal is to kind of depave the paved tarmac and make it into a thriving ecological park that actually welcomes sea level rise. The Wild Oyster Project, which highlighted how oysters are actually really great for the environment. They do wild oyster restoration, oyster shell recycling, urban planning and policy, and sustainable oyster farming. Doer Marine, which works with a lot of submersibles. And then the SF Estuary Partnership, which has been working with tidal marsh restoration in the SF Bay. So we had a really interesting discussion, which ultimately turned into a conversation just about why these estuaries and why these areas are important, and how it ties into actually a bigger picture that relates to equity, transportation, and climate migration. So it was definitely really interesting just to see how so many things are connected to the wetlands surrounding the Bay, and how we really need to work to restore these areas and spread awareness, as well as just encourage people to, enjoy nature, appreciate nature. And like, by doing so, we can encourage people to get more involved with the restoration process.
Good. Thank you, Clevian. Thank you so very much. Getting a lot of virtual applause there I see hands there. So thank you everyone for acknowledging her as well. Next up, we will hear from, see if our next workshop is carbon sequestration and carbon farming. Is that Ruth Abbey? Ruth?
Yeah, Anthony is going to report in for us.
Oh, Anthony. Okay, good. Sorry. Go ahead there, Anthony.
Thanks, Amos. We heard an incredible overview. Ben from the Contra Costa RCD told us all about RCDs and the incredible work they're doing throughout the Bay Area. If you are not familiar with RCDs, which stands for Resource Conservation District. They're a quasi-governmental entity that is doing incredible work helping farmers implement carbon farm plans around the region. Please look them up and get in touch. Then we heard from Trevor at Stop Waste, who's doing a lot of community organizing around carbon farming and awareness building around compost and other incredible carbon farming work. He outlined, among other things, a plan at Altamont, where they're doing 10 acres of carbon farming now, going on 100 next year. And so just exciting to hear about all the action that's underway and community organizing. Then we heard from Amos about 100,000 Trees for Humanity, great program in Alameda, hitting a lot of sustainable development goals and mobilizing urban forestry and really focusing on like keeping things simple and activating kind of the psychology around like optimism and connection to solutions. And then we were running out of time, but I gave an overview of our work at Zero Foodprint, where we were really trying to mobilize, what I would say is potentially like millions of dollars of funding from citizens in the private sector, to help individual regions hit their climate action goals and to fulfill SB 1383 requirements. And so if anybody on this call is like a city planner or a waste management person working on those goals, I would love to give you like the full pitch, which is more complicated and wonky than can be explained in just a few minutes. But overall, I think, we heard a lot about like actual solutions that are being implemented, and then also a little bit of like overall theory of change of how we can drive funding and awareness and really mobilize carbon sequestration up to kind of like the scientific potential that is starting to emerge in climate circles.
Good. Thank you so very much, Anthony. Next up, we'll hear from our Zero Waste panel, Zero Waste on plastic pollution and wasted food reduction. And who will that be? Go ahead and unmute yourselves, please.
Thanks, Amos.
You're welcome.
So we had a really
and this is Beth Krebs.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I'm part of the Planning Logistics Committee here at the CEMTF. So in our workshop, we were talking both about this need for a whole big system shift to reframe our ideas about convenience and also to think of ourselves as citizens rather than consumers. And each of the presenters kind of at least touched on their own experience of seeing this huge need for a system shift, but also starting where they are and taking steps very locally to build organizations. So we talked about the importance of considering the entire life cycle built into the products, the cost of the products we buy, so that we can shift the responsibility from consumers to producers who benefit from the existing systems. We talked about the importance of regional initiatives and that bottom-up implementation is really key, so that these initiatives are responsive to the communities that they're in. And then we talked a lot in terms of Debbie Raphael's call to move from anxiety into action. We were thinking about how government really reacts to our actions, and it's really who's in the room when decisions are being made. So calls to action to show up and really make what we want to happen known. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. And finally, we'll hear from our group on consumption. Consumption-based, if you will, greenhouse gas accounting. Who will be reporting out from there? Please unmute yourself, please.
That'll be me, Ben Gould. My video can't turn on because I need the host to enable it.
Laura or Ruth, can you please click on Ben and enable his video, please? Thanks. There you go. Hi, Ben.
Hi. Thank you. So I'm with Ecodata Lab, and we presented along with Chris Jones from the Cool Climate Network and Brian Reyes from City and County of San Francisco. We talked about consumption-based emissions inventories, which are a contrast to traditional city greenhouse gas inventories, which look only at the direct emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases within the city limits. So traditional inventory might look at, vehicle trips within the city or natural gas burned in the city, whereas consumption-based inventory considers all the things we've been talking about up to this point. It considers, the waste generated by residents of the city that might get shipped outside, looks at the food emissions, looks at your air travel, and looks at a much more holistic approach. This is done by basically scaling up an individual household carbon footprint, which many of you have probably taken at some point, and doing it citywide to look at the city's overall consumption. We looked at how this can really help inform cities' opportunities to drive greenhouse gas emission reductions beyond their own geographic borders and figure out other opportunities for policy shifts that can have broader impacts. Ecodata Lab's role is we're partnering with Chris Jones and the Cool Climate Network to help bring this software, these research tools available to the public at large, so we can have cities throughout California deploying these consumption-based emissions inventories to find new opportunities for emission reductions. And Brian Reyes from City of SF talked about how SF has actually done one of these consumption-based emission inventories and is looking at ways to then move forward with this new inventory, looking at opportunities around emission reductions around for food, for embodied emissions and new construction, looking at how they can work with SFO, a department of the city and county, to reduce aviation emissions as well. And we answered we talked about in our breakout groups and other audience questions around things like the responsibility question and equity issues as well, because a lot of consumption is often higher income individuals consuming flights, that kind of thing. How does this play out equitably, and where's responsibility fall on individuals or households versus businesses, for instance? And we really talked about how the consumption-based emissions inventory is a tool for policymakers to look at the opportunities for behavior change and then figure out policies that can best address that at the right level. So maybe, transportation is a big challenge in your community, and you could incentivize people to get EVs by doing a financial incentive, or you could build bus and bike lanes, and you can see that show up in the data through reduced vehicle ownership and travel. Similarly, it helps align communities that might not otherwise engage on higher level issues like food policy around reducing emissions from meat consumption or other animal products, by really having them recognize that they are partly responsible for those emissions and getting them invested and engaged in state or national advocacy around reducing our dietary footprints, for instance. That was what we talked about. Thank you.
Sorry, there we go. Thank you so very much. And that wraps up our report outs for our groups. I see we're 10 to 12. We're doing really good on time. So I really want to thank everyone for such robust discussions and for really, putting your hearts into not holding us accountable, but really asking the tough questions to get us in our groups and our organizations to actually begin a dialogue and a process to connect with you. We're going to move on now to, hold on there. I believe as we close out here, I want to just quickly acknowledge that we do have our final for this year, November summit that we will have. And that will be, do we have a date for that, Jack, that we have already, or Ruth, that you have there? I don't have the date there in front.
November 20th. It's got to be
the
third Friday. Our past practice has been the fourth Friday, but that would be the day after Thanksgiving. So that's not going to work.
Good. And it'll be focused on actions for local governments, I believe, and local city and county strategies that we'll be focusing on.
Could I say a couple more words about that, Amos?
Please, yeah, please do.
Okay, so as Amos has said, we've completed 4. The main focus of our summit series, and this last one is our attempt to summarize and identify next steps. And this is obviously an ongoing process. We're far, far from having achieved these goals, but we started with declaring climate emergencies. And now 90% of the people in the Bay Area live in cities or counties that have declared climate emergencies. So that's a tremendous accomplishment. But the question is, what do we do next? And that's what these summits have been trying to do, is identify what are the steps that all the cities, counties, and the state can take. So it's going to be a big job to sum it up. We've had so many ideas and so many things. We started a little document about actions, and hopefully we can keep building on that. Please, feel free to contribute to that process by joining our efforts at the Climate Emergency Mobilization. I will say there's a little election coming up November 3rd that might affect a little bit the future of what's possible in the realm of climate action. If we have a federal government that still denies that it's even a reality, that's a problem. On the other hand, if we have a government that at least says, hey, this is a big problem and we've got to do something about it, that opens up the possibilities of lots of new ground. So we've invited Barbara Lee, a congresswoman from Oakland, to be a keynote. We've not confirmed that yet. So that's just an invitation. We've also made some of the other things. I thought Armando's talk today certainly opened the door to a lot of conversation about just transition and how we can do that. As I mentioned, we've got this little document we're working on that does list all the ideas that have come out of these workshops, but we need to condense it and look at what's really realistic and what can we really focus on We've also contacted a writer, Saul Griffith, who talks a lot about how do we fund all this? And that's a big issue. So we have a lot that we've talked about for that November summary, and I think it's going to be really good, but I can't give you a real definitive list of who the speakers are and everything yet, but I do urge everybody. I think it's great that 92 people are on this call right now, and that's, like Cheryl said, great that you're all hanging in, and we're really trying to make this stuff happen. So thanks so much for being part of it, and thank you, Amos and Cheryl, for leading the way.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
And thank you all. In the chat, again, stay in touch with us, join us, sign into our website. I have the link there to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force website. We'll soon be posting, again, this information. If you click on the events tab, you'll see all of our events that we've put on, what those workshops were, even videos, and some comments, or not comments, but text information there as well for you to get into. There's also, we have a monthly, if you will, coalition meeting, task force meeting, that you can get in touch with us and or start to attend and bring your organization or your region or your NGO or your city into this coalition task force to really start getting your hands connected with ours on that regional conversation. And I do want to thank everyone for being here. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Davila for final remarks, please.
Well, thank you, Amos. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Karina Gould. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everybody, all the panelists, all the speakers. It's been an amazing series, and I'm just so proud and humbled that my son had the vision to get me motivated on to address the climate, and I really enjoyed his presentation today. And I just look forward to the future because I know you all are doing the work to make our life and our planets better for everyone. And remember, we're in this time and we have to vote. Hopefully I'll still be here after the 4th because I'm up for that too. And we have a lot of work to do and we have to do it together. So I look forward to the future and thank you for participating. And we'll see you on November 20th. Thank you so much. Have a blessed day. Stay healthy, be safe, wear your mask, physically distance, and show love. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.